Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Listening to Black Widow's threat, Su Xing's inner joy vanished instantly. What is all this about? What kind of image do I have in my teammates' hearts? They don't trust me at all. Su Xing tilted his head. I promise. I'll try my best to hold them off. You can do it, Natasha. Hearing Su Xing stop talking, Black Widow held her breath. She unleashed a smooth combo on a programmer who tried to resist. Looking at the screen full of code, Black Widow was extremely annoyed. One after another, they're all lunatics. The thought of Tony also joining S.H.I.E.L.D. filled her with mixed emotions. Although she couldn't supervise Tony's side. Pepper Potts, however, was different. Black Widow's mental state, upon hearing Tony's plan from the recorder, was exactly like Pepper's. It wasn't because she was worried about Stark Enterprises. Rather, Black Widow smelled a hint of arrogance in this plan. The thought of Tony joining S.H.I.E.L.D. and potentially having to partner with him in the future made Black Widow incredibly annoyed. First, a self-disciplined freak who leaves on time, then a narcissist. Even if S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't have spies, it would probably destroy itself. Meanwhile, at the Stark Expo, Su Xing listened with interest as Hammer, the host on stage, boasted about his exhibits. This technology, I believe, will definitely ignite everyone's passion. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Tony's technology, unsurpassed in the past 20 years. Following Hammer's gesture, a series of black armors instantly rose onto the stage. The audience immediately erupted in enthusiastic cheers. Looking at the already boiling crowd, Hammer couldn't suppress the smile on his face. This was exactly what he wanted. After tonight, Hammer Enterprise would definitely snatch all of Stark Enterprises' shareholders. From now on, the roles of Stark Enterprises and Hammer Enterprise would be reversed. From now on, they would eat meat, and Stark would only be able to pick at scraps. Suppressing his inner excitement, Hammer snapped his fingers. Don't rush, everyone. Next, I will display our mature exhibit, a perfect war machine. In the center of the stage, the war machine piloted by Rhodes slowly ascended. Finally, it appeared completely before everyone. Even Su Xing was momentarily shocked by Rhodes' appearance. With this equipment armed to the teeth, Hammer truly invested heavily in this set of armor. As expected of a promotional item used to attract investment. Listening to the enthusiastic applause from the audience, Hammer was even happier, but before he could say a few trash-talking remarks to mock Tony, a red figure flew in from the horizon. On the stage, Tony landed directly beside Rhodes. The crowd's attention was instantly drawn, and they all cheered Tony's name. Su Xing, mixed in with the crowd, clapped along. Wow! Superhero landing. Meanwhile, Hammer was completely stunned by this sudden turn of events, suddenly not knowing what to do. Facing the cheers from the audience, Tony waved an acknowledgement while connecting to Rhodes' communication system. This exhibition is dangerous, you must believe me. For his longtime close friend, Rhodes didn't hesitate at all. What should I do? Seeing that Rhodes had received the message, Tony walked directly towards Hammer. By this time, Hammer had already recovered from his shock. Unwilling to be upstaged by Tony, he held the microphone and stood in front of the two, trying to regain control of everyone's attention. Sensing the sound of metal stepping on the ground, Hammer nervously turned around, looking at Tony with a guilty expression. Where is Ivan? Listening to Tony's interrogation, Hammer still tried to argue. I don't know what you're talking about. Ivan isn't imprisoned. Tony didn't waste words and grabbed Hammer by the collar in front of everyone. Where is Ivan? Before the panicking Hammer could react, Rhodes' slightly panicked voice came from behind Tony. Tony. Listening to the audience's gasps, Tony put down the lifted hammer and turned around alertly. And this turn directly faced the muzzles of all the armors behind Rhodes, led by Rhodes himself. Rhodes said nervously, It wasn't me. I lost control. Before he finished speaking, the light machine gun on Rhodes' arm spewed fire, directly sweeping towards Tony. Tony immediately flew to change targets, but a few bullets still shot towards the crowd. Whether intentional or not, these bullets all deviated from the panicked crowd. Tony, in the air, reacted and looked at the threatened crowd. Tony's voice covered the stage. "You want to fight? Then let's go somewhere else and have some fun." After speaking, Tony directly controlled his armor and flew out. All the armors led by Rhodes instantly followed. The glass of the venue shattered, falling towards the crowd. In the chaos, no one noticed that several sharp fragments were all deflected from their path, avoiding the crowd. Su Xing, in a trench coat, pressed his earphone. "Can you be a little faster?" Black Widow's anxious voice came from the other end. "I'm cracking it with all my might." Hearing Black Widow's reply, Su Xing glanced at Tony flying out and the string of black armors behind him, then strode out of the venue. "Give up on those armors developed solely by Hammer. Tony's armor is a different system. Ivan must have used 2 different codes. Prioritize cracking Rhodes' set." Hearing Su Xing's plan, Black Widow immediately followed Su Xing's method. "By the way, pinpoint Rhodes' armor. Send it to me. I'll go over there." Receive. After assigning Black Widow's task, Su Xing arrived in front of his special car. Looking at the location sent by Black Widow, Su Xing stepped on the gas, and the car, as if granted a soul, flexibly weaved through the congested crowd. With the help of the serum and platinum star, the car's speed was directly pulled to its maximum. Because Tony was being pursued in the air, Su Xing on the ground barely kept up with him. Looking at Tony, who was being surrounded and intercepted in the sky, appearing somewhat disheveled. In a hidden corner, Ivan curled his lips. "This will be your end, Tony." And on the other side, Su Xing, who was driving, looked at the Jotaro-style hat placed next to the passenger seat and also curved his lips. New York City Center, where the sounds of the city roared. Night was almost falling. The entire city was enveloped in a faint twilight. The neon lights of the skyscrapers flickered incessantly. But even at this hour, the streets were still teeming with crowds. This should have been a normal day in New York City. However, several figures streaking across the sky broke the peace of the night. "Look, what the hell is that? Dad, is this a show?" No. David, quickly take the child away from there." "Oh, damn it." Along with the screams of the crowd, several missiles struck the towering skyscrapers. At the same time, countless bullets were mixed in, causing another wave of panic among the crowd. Tony, in the air, dodged the countless incoming fire from behind while analyzing the current situation. After barely dodging a few bullets, Tony looked at the chaotic crowd and said anxiously, "How much further until we're out of the city center?" 2 more minutes. Tony gritted his teeth. "Faster. What if we increase the speed to maximum? Planning a route for you now." Looking at the latest route, Tony quickly adjusted his direction, accelerated, and shot forward. Aside from the fierce gunfire in the sky, on the ground in the city center, an ordinary-looking black sedan sped through the crowd, closely tailing War Machine in the air. Its speed was so fast that it drew a string of curses from the traffic. But miraculously, despite such high speed, the car did not encounter any accidents. All obstacles in front were either smoothly bypassed by the car or moved aside by an unseen force. Noticing Tony's increased speed in the sky, Su Xing also felt a sense of urgency. Although his car had been modified by S.H.I.E.L.D. as a car, its speed had already reached the maximum of existing technology. But Tony and his companions were wearing armored suits after all. This was like a car racing against an airplane. Even if you added several rocket thrusters to the car's tail, it still couldn't win. Under the attacks of the controlled War Machine and several subsequent armored suits, Su Xing barely managed to keep up with them. However, at the moment, Tony's sudden increase in speed made this chase even more unbalanced. Dodging the vehicles in front of him, Su Xing felt some regret. If he hadn't been afraid of attracting attention, he would have really liked to come in a fighter jet. Watching the distance between himself and Tony in the air grow, Su Xing pulled out his hand and quickly tapped his earpiece. "Natasha, has the war machine program been cracked?" Black Widow's urgent voice came from the other end. "Almost there. The person who developed this program is a bit smarter than me. I need one more minute." After controlling Platinum Star to knock away a stone that was about to hit a girl by the roadside, Su Xing replied, "Speed up. As long as we can infiltrate War Machine, Rhodes and Tony will take care of the rest of the armored suits." "I'm already speeding up." Hearing Black Widow's reply, Su Xing let go of his hand. Looking at Tony's disheveled appearance in the air, he couldn't help but sigh. If he hadn't been worried about accidentally injuring Rhodes, Tony would probably have handled the other armored suits following him alone by now. It makes me want to cry. Thinking of the deep friendship between Tony and Rhodes, Su Xing became even more determined to get involved in the Skrull plan. Anyway, whether he wanted to or not, this world would ultimately not be the same as it was originally due to his arrival. Since that was the case, he could only do his best to protect the current beauty first. As for future threats, that could wait until later. In the sky, as Tony accelerated, consuming more energy, all the armored suits had flown out of the city. Only the thick, lingering smell of gunpowder remained in the air. At this moment, Black Widow finally cracked the program Ivan left in War Machine. "Done. It's on a hillside not far from the city. I've sent you the coordinates." Looking at the constantly flashing red dot on the screen representing War Machine, Su Xing sharply turned the wheel, changed direction, and rushed towards the outskirts of the city. Already on the way. On the hillside, the fleeing Tony suddenly heard Rhodes' voice coming through. "I've regained control, Tony." Tony's heart was filled with joy. "Let's give them a show." With that, Tony maneuvered his armored suit to roll in the air, dodging the incoming fire from behind, while also releasing several miniature missiles, firing them at the relentlessly pursuing armored suits behind him. As the scattered armored suit fragments fell to the ground, War Machine, controlled by Rhodes, also suddenly turned its gun, shooting down several armored suits. The two fought as they retreated. At a corner, Tony and Rhodes landed on the ground, unleashing their firepower on the encircling armored suits. In an instant, the entire area was filled with continuous artillery fire. But even though Tony and Rhodes' firepower was fierce enough, they still couldn't stop the sheer number of armored suits mass-produced by Hammer. More and more armored suits stopped one by one around Tony and Rhodes. Before long, the two were surrounded. Forced into the center, Tony and Rhodes stood back to back, scanning the circle of armored suits surrounding them. While continuously firing, Tony said to Rhodes, "Do you have any big moves?" Not suitable for this situation, seeing that all the surrounding armored suits had aimed their palm cannons at them. Tony no longer hesitated and directly adjusted the armored suit's power to maximum. "Bend down." The moment Rhodes bent down without the slightest hesitation, two laser beams shot directly from Tony's palm cannons. Centering on the two, they directly drew a circle. The armored suits surrounding them were smoothly cut in half. In an instant, the battlefield, which had been incredibly noisy a second ago, suddenly became silent. Listening to the zizz electric sounds from the severed armored suit wreckage, Rhodes straightened up. Noticing the change in their surroundings, even though he knew Tony's capabilities, Rhodes still felt a surge of surprise. New weapon. Tony also withdrew his stance at this moment and straightened his posture. Stark Enterprises product. Rhodes retracted his deployed weapons and asked Tony, "What should we do now?" "We must find Ivan. He's the one who orchestrated this battle." Hee. Sensing something was wrong, the two quickly took up their stances towards the source of the sound, only to see in the shadow Ivan, fully clad in the latest armored suit, walked out of the shadow. The two blue energy whips in his hands dragged on the ground, leaving two clear marks. I don't think you need to look. I'm right here. Watching Ivan approach, Tony raised his head. We can talk. There's no need for things to get to this point. Hearing Tony's words, Ivan scoffed. There's nothing to talk about between us. As long as you and Stark Enterprises are destroyed, our grievances will end here, on the hillside. The surrounding grassland had been plowed over by the war. Even a few scorched, withered blades of grass were hard to find. Looking at Ivan, who appeared before him, Rhodes was puzzled. Grudge? Had Tony had any contact with this person? But no matter what, even if there was something between Ivan and Tony, he shouldn't have planned this disaster. Moreover, as Tony's good friend, Rhodes himself stood on Tony's side. Hearing Ivan's words, Tony also opened his weapon. In that case, it seems we might be entangled for life. With that, Tony was about to open fire. And at this moment, a prompt suddenly popped up. Insufficient energy. Looking at the flickering prompt bar, Tony was a little flustered. Damn it. Traveling and the previous energy overload. Even though a new element had just been replaced, under such drastic consumption, the energy provided by the arc reactor was a bit stretched at this moment. Noticing Tony's abnormality, Rhodes was a little surprised and looked at Tony with some concern. Ivan swung his whip, leaving several irregular marks on the ground. Not enough energy control. I must admit, you've done well enough, but unfortunately, it's not good enough. After speaking, Ivan directly lashed out with a whip. Tony, with insufficient energy, narrowly dodged. Seeing that the situation was not right, Rhodes raised his gun and was about to open fire. And just then, a voice suddenly came over. Sorry, everyone. Time was a bit tight, I just made it. As Su Xing spoke, a car that had almost seen better days drove over. Hearing this voice, Rhodes was even more puzzled, looking at Tony with a perplexed expression. Do you still have unclear grudges with other people? After dodging the attack, Tony's face under the helmet, as he slightly bowed, appeared extremely distorted. After a brief recovery, Tony raised his head and said to Rhodes, I didn't want to. Meanwhile, Ivan on the other side also stopped his attack. He wanted to see who else was Tony's reinforcement. Under everyone's gaze, the car door opened. Su Xing, wearing a trench coat and a hat similar to Jotaro's, stepped out. With a gentle touch, the car door, which had already suffered many attacks, could no longer withstand it and fell off directly. In the silence of the crowd, Su Xing looked back at the almost scrapped car, then looked at everyone. The quality of cars nowadays is really getting worse and worse, huh? Rhodes' eyes were filled with confusion and shock. This newcomer, why does he look a bit abnormal? Tony had already closed his eyes. Perhaps because Su Xing called out Tony when he got out of the car, he now inexplicably felt very embarrassed. And Ivan, on the other side, still looked at Su Xing with vigilance. Although he looked unreliable, a lunatic couldn't possibly follow him to this place. Years of revenge opportunity were right in front of him, and he couldn't miss it due to a moment of carelessness. Noticing everyone's gazes, Su Xing felt no embarrassment at all. He wanted to laugh. If they knew how he drove all the way here, they definitely wouldn't be laughing. One must know that his action this time was no different from driving a car to chase a plane. Even with Platinum Star and excellent driving skills, Su Xing encountered considerable difficulties on the way. The most outrageous thing was that he even caught up. If others saw this, it would be worthy of an award, right? They were even complaining. Looking at the surrounding scene, Su Xing breathed a sigh of relief. Despite rushing, he still made it. In a moment of silence, Tony was the first to speak. What are you doing here? Su Xing replied with a smile. Isn't it obvious, Tony? I'm here to help you. Hearing Su Xing's words, Ivan's gaze towards Su Xing became even more hostile. Since he was here to stop his revenge, and since things had already developed to this point, he didn't mind taking a few more lives. Before Rhodes could ask, Tony directly refused. I said it. I don't need your help. I can handle all of this. With that, Tony looked at Rhodes beside him. Facing his friend's gaze, a bewildered Rhodes, although he didn't know what was happening, still firmly obeyed Tony's wishes. Yes, I'll handle all of this. Then he looked at Ivan. Under everyone's gaze, a small gap appeared on his shoulder. I'm very sorry to use this on you. With Rhodes' confident expression, something that looked like a small missile suddenly launched. Everyone, prepare yourselves. The small missile shot out with powerful firepower, heavily striking the armor on Ivan's chest, and then it fell down. It bounced a few times in a puddle of water on the ground, then completely lost its tail flame. Under Ivan's playful gaze, Rhodes slightly stepped back. Hammer tech. Facing Tony's question, Rhodes nodded. Yes. Looking at the scene unfolding before him, Ivan could no longer bear it. This was supposed to be a serious revenge, not a joker's performance. All right, joke's over. It's time for us to get serious. Ivan swung his whips twice, directly lashing out at Tony in front. At such close range, Tony couldn't dodge in time and was directly struck in the chest, falling backward with his armor. Beneath the helmet, the screen instantly flashed a dangerous red. Warning! Warning! Chest armor under attack. Seeing Tony attacked, Rhodes instantly raised his arm, aiming his gun at Ivan. But before he could open fire, Ivan directly knocked his raised arm aside. The weapon mounted on his arm was also destroyed. With another whip, Rhodes was also struck to one knee. And just as Ivan was about to swing another whip, intending to preemptively eliminate Rhodes, who still posed a certain threat, his whip merely grazed past Rhodes, and instead, its tail struck his own armor. Ivan was whipped backward several steps. This sudden turn of events stunned Tony, who had raised his repulsor, and Rhodes, who was kneeling on one knee. No. What's going on? But no matter what, the situation was now in his favor, and Tony immediately entered taunting mode. If you're not used to weapons like whips, you really shouldn't have designed them in the first place. Listening to Tony's taunt, Su Xing also felt emotional. They say Marvel's best trash talkers are Spider-Man and Deadpool. But from his observation, Tony could definitely be counted as one. And Ivan, being taunted, was even more shocked, directly ignoring Tony's taunt. Again, this phenomenon, defying the laws of physics, happened again. Just at the moment he made his move, he could clearly feel his wrist being pinched by someone, which caused him to perform such an absurd action. Ivan, whose mind was severely impacted, suddenly panicked. Impossible. He clearly prayed specifically before setting out, so why would something like this still happen? There must be something wrong here. Ivan's gaze swept over everyone in turn. Tony, who was still on the ground, unable to get up, and Rhodes, who was severely injured and incapacitated beside him. And that cross-dresser with sharp eyes and a forced tough guy face. Ivan's pupils dilated in shock. Could it be him? As his gaze shifted, Ivan, who had been reduced to a pathetic state by his own lightning whip, fixed his eyes on Su Xing. At this moment, a gentle breeze swept by. On the hillside, Su Xing's dark trench coat fluttered slightly, swaying gently in the wind. Accompanied by the carefully designed, deliberately low-pulled hat, from a distance, the oppressive feeling was simply overwhelming. Of course, if he hadn't struck that outrageous pose. Looking at Su Xing's strange movements, Ivan swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Shit. He didn't know why, but this person, despite looking erratic, somehow felt inexplicably strong. As Ivan fixed his gaze on Su Xing, Rhodes, who was kneeling on the ground and hadn't had time to catch his breath, and Tony, who had already stood up behind him, also turned their attention to Su Xing. The originally tense atmosphere, with Su Xing's move, successfully descended into a bizarre situation. Seeing everyone's gaze on him, Su Xing smiled slightly. Humph. You must have been attracted by my carefully designed JoJo pose. If it weren't for his social anxiety in his previous life and the people he cared about, he would have done this long ago. Anyway, there's no one he cares about in this world right now, so he can strike any JoJo pose he wants. This outfit, with a 99% accuracy in replication, combined with Su Xing's chiseled, dashingly handsome face. Most importantly, and the genuine, truly genuine platinum star. The smile at the corner of Su Xing's mouth widened a few more points. Who could tell the difference between him and Jotaro now? Looking at the pose, with one hand in his pocket, the other touching his forehead, and his hips inexplicably thrust forward. Rhodes turned off his external comms and asked Tony through the suit's communication system. Why would he disable both of his hands first? Isn't he afraid of that madman suddenly ambushing him? Hearing Rhodes' confusion, Tony slightly raised his head and unhurriedly adjusted his posture. Even through the armor, his aura of control was palpable. Which one are you referring to? Facing Rhodes' silence, Tony, beneath his helmet, truly didn't know what expression to use to deal with this scene. You say it's dangerous. Ivan is whipping himself. And next to him stands an abstract figure, striking a damned pose. But if you say it's not dangerous, Ivan is still holding two whips after all, energy-bound, and just from those two hits, he and Rhodes might not be able to withstand them. And this abstract figure next to them, they don't even know if he's friend or foe. Regarding Su Xing, Tony was truly at a loss. Don't let his abstract appearance fool you. His actions are even more incomprehensible. Tony tried his best to adjust his state. This confrontation seemed like a 3-on-1, but he wasn't sure if it would turn into Su Xing against 3, or even evolve into a 2-on-2. He had to quickly prepare for the worst. During the standoff, seeing Rhodes, who was almost back on his feet, Ivan gritted his teeth and shifted his target to Su Xing. From the current situation, the person most likely to have caused that unphysical phenomenon earlier seems to be this person who looks a bit cerebellar atrophied. The thought of his hands uncontrollably twitching earlier made Ivan tremble uncontrollably, and his hands also began to shake involuntarily. He still remembered clearly, in the racetrack, that series of incredible scenes in his eyes. Tony suddenly skipping frames while moving. The high-speed race car stopping on a dime. Even now, thinking about it, Ivan couldn't help but feel fear. As a physics genius, science was the foundation of his understanding of the world. Such a situation was unacceptable to him. It was like a normal person suddenly walking upside down on the ceiling. A child who knows nothing might clap their hands and cheer happily. But if an adult saw it, they would probably be scared into paralysis instantly. The impact was too great. Ivan, having lost his anchor, barely managed to achieve logical self-consistency and not go insane. But that inexplicable force appeared again just now. Ivan clearly knew that the previous series of events violating physical laws occurred precisely after his hands strangely twitched. That feeling was as if someone standing nearby suddenly twisted him. Ivan tried to regulate his breathing, wanting to calm himself down. But it was useless. Looking at Su Xing, who was smiling strangely at him, Ivan truly couldn't help but feel afraid. Oh God. His wisdom was limited to physical matters. Please don't involve things related to ghosts. Seeing Rhodes, who had almost recovered, out of the corner of his eye, Ivan knew he couldn't wait any longer. He gritted his teeth and directly swung his whip towards Su Xing. Ivan knew in his heart. Among the three opposite him, the most threatening one was currently Su Xing, not Tony and Rhodes, who were low on energy. While swinging one whip, Ivan paused and also controlled the other whip. The two whips intertwined closely, completely sealing off Su Xing's retreat at this distance. Seeing Ivan suddenly erupt and lash out at the unarmed Su Xing, the kind-hearted Rhodes anxiously shouted, "Watch out!" Unlike Tony, as a soldier, Rhodes clearly knew the danger of Ivan's attack. Without a weapon to block, no matter what Su Xing did, he would be hit. And being hit by those two energy whips? Rhodes was extremely anxious. Just based on the damage those two whips did to his armor, if they landed on the defenseless Su Xing, he'd be in pieces. Seeing that he could no longer interrupt Ivan's movements, Rhodes looked at Tony in a panic. This glance was significant. Seeing Tony still in his previous pose, showing no intention of acting, Rhodes was directly stunned. Dude, I know you're usually very relaxed as a playboy, but this relaxation is too much. Looking at the current situation, Su Xing is completely capable of saving us. Even if you put that aside, this is a human life. How can you just stand by and do nothing? Unlike the panicking Rhodes, Tony, seeing Ivan make a move, was not alarmed at all. It didn't matter that he only had a superficial understanding of fighting techniques. He knew whether a normal person could dodge it. Because Su Xing was not a normal person at all. He could even slice bullets with a knife, and he couldn't dodge this attack. Furthermore, with strong personal feelings, Tony was very sure that even if Su Xing's speed couldn't dodge it, he wouldn't just give up for nothing. Someone who clocks out on time and refuses to work an extra minute, you expect him to sacrifice his life for work? Are you crazy? And at this very moment, as the protagonist at the center of this incident, Su Xing smiled even wider, looking at the whip swinging towards him. Oh, coming head on? You're not choosing to run, but actively approaching me? Then don't blame him. Su Xing maintained his original posture, watching the energy whips streak through the air like two bolts of lightning. Seeing the whips about to strike Su Xing, Rhodes instinctively closed his eyes, not daring to watch the scene unfold. Accompanied by a gasp. With his eyes closed, Rhodes felt a strange feeling in his heart. No. This sound, why does it not sound like Su Xing's cry of pain, but rather Ivan's? Opening his eyes, Rhodes, beneath his armor, widened his eyes. Ivan, who had just held the initiative, was now sprawled on the ground, his expression filled with unbearable pain. And that seemingly not-so-bright reinforcement was still standing perfectly fine in his original spot, maintaining that strange posture. Looking at the scene before him, Rhodes was so surprised he didn't know what to say. In just the blink of an eye, how did the situation completely reverse? What happened? Before Rhodes could react, the armor's AI had already scanned Ivan's anomalies. Looking at the inexplicably appearing dent on Ivan's armor, Rhodes was even more bewildered. What is this thing? Why, upon closer inspection, does that dent look like a fist print? Rhodes once again turned his gaze to Tony, his meaning very clear. Holy moly! Buddy, you know people like this. Tony, who had witnessed the entire process, directly ignored Rhodes' questioning gesture. Heh. Ask me. Do I know? Just now, as Ivan's whip was about to land on Su Xing, he couldn't help but prepare to act when Ivan was directly sent flying. He wasn't exaggerating. Ivan truly flew out. The speed was so fast that he didn't even react. In the armor's slow-motion playback, Tony also felt a hint of the same mindset as Ivan. No. How is this possible? In the playback, Ivan was like he was suddenly hit in the chest, arching his body like a shrimp, and was repelled to the ground. Looking at the impact marks on Ivan's chest extracted by the armor, Tony was even more dumbfounded. He knew Su Xing was fast. But he couldn't be this fast, could he? He hadn't even blinked just now. No matter how fast he was, he couldn't have seen absolutely no trace. Glancing at Su Xing, who was still maintaining that embarrassing posture, Tony further dismissed this idea. Unless you tell me he's not human, I won't believe it. At the same time, Ivan, who was attacked and lay on the ground grimacing in pain, was even more shocked. Who can tell him what just happened? He didn't even move. How did he counterattack? Feeling the intense pain coming from his chest, Ivan felt even more fear. Honestly, as someone who had been tempered in Siberia, he had a strong tolerance for physical pain. But that blow just now seemed to have penetrated the armor and hit his body. The force was so great that even a slight movement would cause him excruciating pain. How is this possible? Hearing Ivan's painful struggle, a triumphant Su Xing opened his eyes and looked at Ivan lying on the ground. Heh. Don't look at Ivan's unbearable pain now. This is him holding back. Otherwise, with his human limit's spiritual power, Platinum Star could punch straight through the armor and pierce him. The reason he didn't do so was, of course, not because Su Xing was benevolent or afraid. As a seasoned agent of S.H.I.E.L.D's armed forces, he had killed many people. There was no such thing as being unable to act. Rather, Su Xing felt a bit of pity for Ivan. From a technological standpoint, Ivan's performance in the movie was no weaker than Tony's. Even if there was a slight gap between them, this gap was not enough for Tony to greatly surpass Ivan. Barehanded, as a poor boy, being able to successfully manufacture the blueprints left by his father was already an impossibility for Ivan. If he could be set on the right path, it would also be a contribution to the world. Even if not, his fate would not end in death. As someone who had been workplace buoyed for 2 lifetimes, Su Xing had also picked up a touch of entrepreneurial thinking through osmosis. Losing such a talent directly would be a loss. Ivan should be like Bronsky, who mutated into Abomination, serving as a consumable, contributing his strength and light to S.H.I.E.L.D. As for whether it's humane or not, Su Xing didn't care. Anyway, Fury did it that way. The strategy of the previous leader couldn't just be abandoned. When there are more villains to fight, forming a task force X like the one in DC next door, wouldn't that be wonderful? Let villains fight villains, and the heroes just watch from the side. Then, when Fury has an accident, and he takes over, wouldn't things get better? Just as Su Xing was fantasizing about a beautiful future, a murmuring voice directly interrupted his thoughts. Ivan, lying on the ground, struggled to sit up, his eyes bloodshot, muttering incessantly. I clearly prayed to God. I even carved inscriptions on the armor. Before setting off, I even poured holy water on it. Why did I still suffer such an attack? Listening to Ivan's words, Su Xing was a little shocked inside. No, buddy. Do you think this is Warhammer? You need a forging ritual before setting off, right? On the other side, Tony and Rhodes were even more speechless. What is all this? Holy water? Inscriptions? And prayer? Rhodes directly removed his helmet, the bewilderment on his face completely unconcealed. How did things get so strange ever since Su Xing appeared? Although Rhodes wasn't as devoted to science as Tony. But as a Maximist, Rhodes didn't feel that the words mecha and prayer belonged together at all. Su Xing was out of the question. After all, he wasn't quite normal when he arrived. But Ivan seemed quite normal just now. In the blink of an eye, how did he go crazy? Rhodes looked at Ivan, then at Su Xing, and finally turned his gaze to Tony. Feeling Rhodes' gaze, Tony was even more speechless. Why do you keep looking at me? So you're saying I know, right? I told you, I'm a physicist. Can the things happening here be explained by me? Just based on Ivan's way of speaking, Tony felt the uncanny valley effect triggered from the bottom of his heart. Technology, prayer. Tony glanced at Su Xing, who was still maintaining his strange posture. Does he have something unclean on him? This can't be some kind of spiritual ritual, can it? Even through the armor, Tony felt a chill to his core. And at this moment, feeling the pain in his body, Ivan forcibly stood up. For him, the intense pain had completely unleashed the beast within him. Humph. Very well, then tonight, let's settle this here once and for all. Standing up, Ivan walked towards Su Xing with a ferocious expression. My enemy, the phenomenon that bothers me, all of you die. Seeing Ivan approaching, Su Xing finally changed his posture. He stretched out his hands, making a shrugging gesture, his crotch still provocatively thrust forward. You actually dare to come over? Ivan laughed heartily. If I don't get close to you, how can I thoroughly beat you up? Looking at the approaching Ivan, Su Xing made a Dio-like sound. Ho ho, then come even closer. With that, Su Xing also walked towards Ivan with a flamboyant stride. Tony, on the side, truly had nothing to say. Motherfucker. These two lunatics are actually having a conversation here. Indeed, it was normal for him not to understand Su Xing's thoughts. Just as the two got closer and closer. Suddenly, on a leisurely hillside. At this moment, several people in peculiar clothes were standing there. Tony and Rhodes were wearing high-tech battle suits from across eras, while the remaining Ivan's battle suit also shimmered in the evening light. If one ignored the dazzling inscriptions on his body, Ivan could indeed be considered a civilized person. Unfortunately, they couldn't be ignored. And Su Xing, who was walking towards him, was even more of a heavyweight. If this were a photograph, you would definitely suspect someone had photoshopped it. Either Su Xing or the other three. Looking at Ivan, who was getting closer and closer, Su Xing's smile never faded. Tony and Rhodes, who were off to the side, remained motionless, simply watching. It wasn't that they didn't want to move. Rather, they were slightly hesitant. Observing the strange symbols carved on Ivan's body, and then looking at Su Xing, who seemed to be performing some kind of demonic ritual, Tony really didn't want to make a move. To be honest, he was really afraid that if he acted, his own battle suit might get contaminated with something bad. Although Tony had always disbelieved in demons or gods, on the other hand, it's better to believe such things exist than not. Plus, this matter was connected to Su Xing. That greatly deepened the suspiciousness. On the other hand, Rhodes didn't think as much as Tony. This was, after all, his first meeting with Su Xing, and he lacked a certain understanding of Su Xing. Although Tony hadn't mentioned a person like Su Xing to him, since Su Xing immediately stated his position, there was definitely no threat to their side. Moreover, based on what just happened, his ability was probably enough to handle the current situation. Anyway, both he and Tony were low on energy at the moment, so instead of risking an interception, it was better to just watch from the side. Of course, if this strange man wanted to ask him for help, he would also act immediately. Their approach was very slow, as if time had slowed down at this moment. The reason Ivan was slow was because that last blow was really too painful. To be honest, the fact that he could still stand up and walk towards Su Xing already proved he was a tough person. As for Su Xing, he just wanted to show off a bit. It was a rare opportunity to use his abilities, so how could he let it go? So, those short 10-odd meters between the two of them took several seconds to traverse, and they still hadn't reached each other. Rhodes, who was watching from the side, was greatly shocked. He subconsciously looked at Tony and was glared back by the latter, who had also removed his helmet's protection. So he could only awkwardly watch Ivan and Su Xing's actions from the side. How terrifying. These two must be doing something he couldn't understand. After glaring back at Rhodes, Tony also shifted his gaze to Su Xing. Based on his understanding, this old fellow was definitely plotting something bad behind the scenes. Just as the two got closer and closer, approaching combat distance, Rhodes, who was battle-hardened, actually felt a sense of tension at this moment. Noticing his own unusual state, Rhodes relaxed his body, forcing his muscles not to be so tense, to avoid being affected by any repercussions. At this moment, Ivan suddenly erupted, his speed abruptly increasing. Watching his movements, Tony and Rhodes were both startled and immediately subconsciously put out their weapons, wanting to stop Ivan, but it was clearly too late. The distance between the two was already less than a few meters. With Ivan's sudden burst, Su Xing had already entered his attack range. Enduring the severe pain, he forcibly swung his whips, lashing out at Su Xing, with such speed that it even caused the wind to howl. Ivan grinned ferociously. Everything was according to his plan. As long as this blow connected, no matter if Su Xing was some demon from hell, he would have to return to his rightful place. Looking at Su Xing, who had stopped moving, he became even more smug. Let this all end. The whips had already reached Su Xing's face. The next second, Ivan fell directly to the ground. Thud. As for the two energy whips that were about to hit Su Xing merely tilted his head slightly, and the whips grazed his clothes. They didn't even leave a mark on his clothes. Looking at Ivan, who was suddenly lying unconscious on the ground, Tony and Rhodes, who had witnessed the entire process, were clearly stunned. After a few seconds of reaction, seeing Ivan lying motionless on the ground, Rhodes couldn't help but say, This is over. Listening to the question, which carried 3 parts of doubt, 3 parts of disbelief, and 4 parts of questioning life, Su Xing, who had been constantly posturing with his hips, smiled faintly. Yes, it's over. Hearing Su Xing's answer, Rhodes also looked at Su Xing. Under the glow of the setting sun, this man's face, carved like a knife, was damnably handsome. A hint of regret suddenly welled up in Rhodes' heart at this moment. What a good person. If he wasn't crazy, he would definitely charm many ladies. After dealing with Ivan, Su Xing immediately notified Black Widow. The target has been dealt with. Notify personnel to come and finalize. After reporting, Su Xing also stopped posing. Keeping that hip thrust was indeed a bit tiring. As for the battle just now, he didn't really take it seriously. To be fair, Su Xing did react immediately to Ivan's sudden attack, but it wasn't tension, but rather a bit of surprise. After taking a blow from him, he still had the energy to plot? Impressive. If he hadn't taken the super serum and didn't have Platinum Star's all-seeing observation ability, he might have actually been a little scared. But unfortunately, this battle, which seemed extremely dangerous to others, seemed more like a child's play to him. Just like when he played as the evil Belial and bullied his relatives' children during Chinese New Year in his previous life. No matter how angry that child was, he could only be held down by Su Xing's head, utterly defenseless, listening to Su Xing flaunt his power. Humph, my Lord Belial is going to rule the entire universe. Recalling things from his previous life, Su Xing's constantly hooked smile now turned into a genuine one. People, after all. It's good to go a little crazy occasionally. Just like reminiscing about childhood. As for how he knocked Ivan down, Su Xing glanced at Ivan's exposed head. This child. Still so honest. Squatting down, he flipped Ivan over, placed his hand over the energy source on the battlesuit's chest, and with a gentle squeeze from Platinum Star, the 2 flickering energy whips also lost their luster at this moment. After dealing with all this, Su Xing stood up and clapped his hands. Very good. Protecting the environment is everyone's responsibility. After dealing with Ivan, Su Xing didn't forget what he was actually there for. Helping Tony, who was in despair, defeat Ivan was the first step. The second step was to reveal his Platinum Star to Tony, to gain Tony's trust, and to recruit him into S.H.I.E.L.D. Su Xing twisted his neck, which had been leaning back, turned around, and gave Tony a brilliant smile. What he hadn't quite expected was, as he turned around, Tony, who had originally removed his helmet, immediately put it back on. What do you want? A breeze swept through. Exposed wires on the battle armor occasionally sparked. The entire valley had become a mech-style graveyard. Su Xing was a little bewildered, seeing Tony still on guard, without any relaxation. Haha. After a few awkward laughs, Su Xing turned to Rhodes, who was also looking confused beside Tony, and said, Tony just likes to make jokes, right? Seeing Su Xing greet him, Rhodes' gaze wavered between the two for a moment. Then he temporarily sided with Su Xing. Give me some time, I'll talk to him. With that, Rhodes also put on his mask. In the communication system, audible only to the two of them, Rhodes directly asked, What are you doing, man? This guy just saved our lives. Tony remained on guard, and in response to Rhodes' confusion, he replied, That's true, but I can't be sure if he'll turn on us. What? Rhodes' face was a complete question mark. Turn on them? It was one thing for Su Xing and Ivan to be crazy, but why was Tony acting so strange too? However, before he could retort, he heard Tony say, "Don't talk. Don't make any movements to provoke him. In a little while, he'll be off duty, and then we'll be safe." Rhodes' brain spun rapidly, but he still couldn't understand what Tony was saying. Are those even human words? What was going off duty? He had just playfully defeated Ivan, who was trying to kill them and was covered in high-tech equipment. Off duty? How could those two words be related to him? Noticing Rhodes' confusion, Tony immediately added, "These things are complicated to explain. I originally didn't want to tell you. After he leaves, I'll explain it to you in detail." Listening to Tony's words, Rhodes could clearly sense that Tony's tension wasn't an act. Looking at Su Xing's strange attire, he couldn't help but inwardly complain. Off duty? Him? No matter which organization he belonged to, that work uniform was utterly tasteless. It seemed the organization behind him wasn't a legitimate one either. Meanwhile, looking at the two who had put on their helmets and hadn't reacted for a long time, Su Xing was also getting impatient. Still chatting? He was about to be off duty soon. The original plan was to quickly reveal his abilities to Tony at this moment. Then, use this as a secret to gain Tony's trust and salvage their precarious relationship, thereby quickly ending this mission, which should have ended long ago but was still unfinished. So he directly walked a little closer to the two. Seeing Su Xing approach, Tony's palm repulsor immediately glowed blue. Su Xing immediately raised his hand in a French military salute. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, relax, Tony." Rhodes, beside him, was clearly startled too. "He's right, man. Relax, I'm here." Despite their dissuasion, Tony still gritted his teeth and said, "What are you doing here?" Seeing Tony inquire, Su Xing also lowered his hands. "It's easier if they can communicate. I'm just here to tell you a secret, Tony. If possible, I hope you can keep it confidential." Rhodes quickly interjected, Do I need to step away?" Before Su Xing could respond, Tony's voice came through the armor. "A secret? Is it another secret that could cause an entire organization to hunt you down? An entire organization hunting him down?" Hearing Tony's words, Rhodes was filled with regret, muttering softly to himself, "Fuck, I should have just left." Seeing Tony unwilling to communicate, Su Xing shook his head and said gently, "No, it's not. This is a personal secret of mine. Don't you want to know how I defeated this guy without moving?" Listening to Su Xing's words, Tony's heart wavered slightly. As a physicist, the scene just now had indeed caused him no small shock. A personal secret? Tony hesitated for a moment. "Why would you tell me these things?" Noticing Tony's wavering, Su Xing relaxed and continued to persuade him patiently. "That involves an even bigger secret, my friend. Something big is about to happen, and I must tell you these things. Also, you heard what I just said. S.H.I.E.L.D will be here soon, and I don't think we have much time left." Hearing Su Xing's words, Tony's guard gradually lowered. And Rhodes, understanding his old friend's intention, patted Tony's armored shoulder and said, "I'll be right next door, waiting for you to call me anytime." With that, Rhodes glanced at Su Xing and flew away from the spot. Watching Rhodes leave, Tony also closed his helmet and asked Su Xing, "How did you cause all of this?" Listening to Tony's question, Su Xing quietly walked to the side and asked Tony, "Do you remember what I told you before? That I could directly remove the shrapnel from your heart?" Tony was a little confused but still replied, "Unfortunately, I do remember." Su Xing smiled. "This is very closely related to the secret I'm about to reveal." With that, Su Xing stared into Tony's eyes and said, "Tell me, Tony, do you believe in the existence of superpowers?" Superpowers? Listening to Su Xing's words, Tony became even more puzzled, and his patience with Su Xing gradually decreased. Abilities like captains? No, Captain's abilities come from science. What I'm talking about isn't science. Tony looked helpless. He should have known. What reliable words could come out of Su Xing's mouth? That's it. Feeling the strong distrust in Tony's tone, Su Xing said with a smile. Calm down, Tony. Not everything in this world can be explained by science. Tony sneered. Are you trying to say that I worship science? Su Xing shook his head. No, I'm trying to say you shouldn't be superstitious about science. Tony turned to leave. Still superstitious about science. He had long known that Su Xing was not normal, but he never expected him to be so outrageous. So you're trying to tell me that the end of science is theology? Rhodes, we. Just as Tony was calling Rhodes, Tony suddenly stopped speaking. He didn't know why. He inexplicably felt as if a large man was pressing down on both of his shoulders in the not-so-peaceful New York City. Inside the Stark Enterprises building, Pepper Potts watched the chaotic, smoke-filled streets outside, her heart heavy with anxiety. Just moments ago, a massive incident occurred in New York City. Reportedly, the incident originated from out-of-control Hammer Enterprise suits. The estimated damage from this incident is at least tens of millions of US dollars. It's worth noting that Iron Man Tony Stark appeared in this mech riot. It's currently unclear if he is connected to the incident. Turning off the TV, Pepper anxiously placed her hand on her chest, then turned to Happy, who was protecting her, and asked, Have you reached him yet? Happy, equally anxious, listened to his silent phone, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and replied, No, he still isn't answering. Hearing Happy's words, Pepper's heart grew even more frantic. She had known all along that this operation was too reckless. If she had been able to persuade Tony to change his plan, perhaps this situation wouldn't have happened. Tell the reporters that Stark Enterprises is not accepting any interviews for now. Everything will be addressed only after Mr. Tony Stark returns safely. Chasing away the money-hungry reporters, a busy Happy didn't forget to comfort Pepper beside him. Don't worry, Mr. Stark will definitely come back safely. I saw his latest developed suit with my own eyes. It can absolutely crush those pirated products into pieces. Listening to Happy's reassurance, Pepper Potts remained deeply worried. No matter how strong the suit is, he is still just one person. An accident could happen. Seeing that Pepper's worries hadn't lessened, Happy quickly found various excuses, fearing that Pepper might personally go after him, in which case he couldn't guarantee Pepper's safety. Mr. Stark isn't necessarily alone. Colonel Rhodes also went with the boss. Hearing Happy's words, Pepper's eyes lit up. To help Tony? No. As far as I know, he also went to fight the boss. Pepper immediately became agitated. It would have been better if he hadn't said anything. Maintaining her composure, Pepper quickly seized the last opportunity and promptly dialed Rhodes's number. As Tony's good friend, Pepper, as his personal secretary, remembered Rhodes's contact information very clearly. As the phone rang a few times, to Pepper's surprise, Rhodes's voice came from the other end. Hello. Pepper was very excited and, ignoring everything else, quickly asked, Is Tony all right? On the other side of the hill. Rhodes, clad in his Iron Man suit, was a little surprised, then quickly recognized Pepper's voice. Turning to look at the hill not far away, Rhodes shook his head and muttered to himself. After getting down safely, he still doesn't think to put others at ease. After complaining about Tony, Rhodes replied, There was a small mishap in the process, but the overall result is good. Hearing Rhodes's voice, Pepper's heart finally settled. Is he available now? Why hasn't he responded to my messages? Rhodes's eyes darted around as he considered his words. He's fine. He's currently discussing some things. What did you do? At the hill now. Feeling the light but sufficient force on his shoulder, which was just enough to inhibit his flight, Tony felt a little flustered. Su Xing, in front of him, had a mischievous smile, making corresponding gestures with his hands, seemingly grasping at his shoulder from thin air. Watching Su Xing's actions, Tony was greatly shocked. You did this. Seeing Tony's somewhat flustered appearance, Su Xing lowered his hands and shrugged. Who else? Feeling the pressure on his shoulder disappear, Tony immediately flew upwards. The grass where he had been standing already had 2 holes burned through it by the overflowing fire. Tony, flying in the air, felt an unprecedented sense of ease. That feeling just now was too terrifying. Based on that power just now, if Su Xing wanted to, Tony, without proper precautions, wouldn't have any ability to resist. Most importantly, from the moment Su Xing raised his hands until he felt the compression, Jarvis didn't give a single warning. This kind of superpower. Tony looked at Su Xing with even greater vigilance. Although he had known that there were many abnormal things about Su Xing, the appearance of superpowers still caused a considerable stir in his heart. Looking at Tony, who had briefly flown into the air, Su Xing was not flustered at all, because he knew Tony wouldn't run away. After all, if he were to make a move, he wouldn't just hold Tony's shoulder. Tony naturally knew this in his heart. Indeed, Tony, flying in the air, swayed his body and landed again. It wasn't that Tony wanted to descend, but after the intense battle just now, his energy simply couldn't withstand such consumption. Seeing Tony land, Su Xing put away his smile, adopted a serious demeanor, and began to persuade Tony. Listen to me, Tony. Time waits for no one. S.H.I.E.L.D will arrive very soon. In fact, according to the original plan, we wouldn't even have this much time. So, please don't make me say more, okay? Looking at Su Xing's serious face, Tony tried to convince himself to become serious as well. After all, the last time he saw such a serious expression was when they first met, and Su Xing earnestly said he was getting off work. Join S.H.I.E.L.D, Tony. This isn't just to complete a mission, it's also a personal wish of mine. Listening to Su Xing's words, Tony frowned. Before Tony could refuse, Su Xing immediately continued. For some reason, I can't tell you too much. But I think you should also understand that unless it's absolutely necessary, I wouldn't reveal my abilities in front of you. Su Xing paused. You must want to know why I revealed my abilities in front of you. Tony nodded. Su Xing stared intently into Tony's eyes and showed a sincere smile. Because I trust you. After hearing Su Xing's remarks, Tony was silent for a moment, then asked, Does the S.H.I.E.L.D director know about this ability of yours? Su Xing shook his head. No, he doesn't know. He only knows about my fighting ability. Looking at Su Xing's serious demeanor, Tony fell into thought. Logically speaking, Su Xing's words could be said to have no logic at all. But then again, when did he ever do things according to logic? Recalling the director's action of directly pulling out a gun and pointing it at Su Xing in the restaurant last time, it seemed he might indeed not know about Su Xing's ability. And just as Tony fell into thought, because of Platinum Star's existence, Su Xing, with his maxed-out observation, narrowed his eyes and said to Tony, It seems they're moving quite fast. Make a decision, Tony, so I can have a reason to discuss it with you in detail. The fighter jet slowly descended. Several armed personnel with live ammunition immediately emerged, skillfully handling the scene after passing Su Xing and Tony, who was clad in his armor. Ivan, who was lying unconscious on the ground, was given a few more doses of anesthetic by the armed personnel. He was then secured to a stretcher, fully bound, and transported onto the fighter jet. As the fighter jet settled, Nick Fury, dressed in a black trench coat, extended his combat boots and stepped out. Following closely behind him was Black Widow, dressed in a black combat suit. Looking at Nick Fury approaching, Su Xing felt no panic at all. Given the extensive damage caused by this operation, it was only natural for Nick Fury to personally come and clean up the mess. Looking at Su Xing, who was dressed in strange clothes, Nick Fury sighed inwardly. After scanning Su Xing a few times, Nick Fury, who had walked in front of the two, ignored Su Xing's winks and instead spoke to Tony. What have you decided? You've seen the situation, I don't deny that you can solve problems independently. But with our help, at least the losses during the process can be reduced. At least a single mission won't result in hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Looking at Nick Fury's outstretched hand, Tony hesitated. Nick Fury was indeed right. This operation had truly exceeded his expectations. If it was only considered from a cooperative perspective, joining S.H.I.E.L.D was also a suitable choice. What's more? Thinking of this, Tony glanced at Su Xing standing beside him. Noticing Tony's gaze, Nick Fury also followed suit, glancing at Su Xing, who had his hands in his pockets and no opponent, and quickly added a sentence. Don't worry, S.H.I.E.L.D does not enforce strict dress code requirements for its personnel. And one more thing, our combat suits. Nick Fury tilted his head towards Black Widow, who was standing nearby. They are usually like this. Hearing Nick Fury's words, Su Xing was speechless. So, he had to kick me when I was already down, huh? Heh. Whatever. One day, everyone will appreciate the aesthetics of JoJo. Listening to Nick Fury's subtle dig at Su Xing, Tony also showed a knowing smile and made his decision. He removed his armor's helmet and reached out to shake Nick Fury's outstretched hand. I'm in. Nick Fury revealed a benevolent smile. Congratulations. I'm not finished yet. Tony interrupted Nick Fury and in his puzzled gaze, looked at Su Xing on the side. Agent Su promised me a personal request, and I want to formally join S.H.I.E.L.D after he fulfills it. Noticing Tony looking at him, Su Xing slightly raised his eyebrows. Personal request? Since he had promised Tony to clearly explain his abilities, he certainly wouldn't break his word. Looking at the subtly glowing arc reactor on Tony's chest, Su Xing immediately understood Tony's meaning. Oh. So, he was still thinking about having me remove the shrapnel from his chest, huh? The reason he mentioned it in front of Nick Fury was probably to get Nick Fury to vouch for him. Nick Fury, who was beside them, noticed Tony's gaze and instantly understood. Since it was Tony's personal request, it meant it had nothing to do with S.H.I.E.L.D. And since it had nothing to do with S.H.I.E.L.D., they could do whatever they wanted, and he didn't want to interfere. Of course, since you're joining S.H.I.E.L.D., as colleagues, we can naturally help each other. After pushing Su Xing out, Nick Fury added kindly. As long as you don't discuss how to become director of S.H.I.E.L.D. while I'm still in office, anything can be discussed. Black Widow, who was following behind Nick Fury, also felt her mood lighten considerably with that remark. Although she knew the matter was serious, she still couldn't help but want to laugh. Tony automatically ignored Nick Fury's veiled warnings. Now he just wanted to solve the problem that had troubled him for so long. Whatever Nick Fury wanted to say, so be it. Of course. Seeing Tony successfully join S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Widow, who had just managed to hold back her laughter, said to Nick Fury, "In that case, I'll go handle other missions." Nick Fury nodded, tacitly agreeing to Black Widow's words. As she passed Su Xing, Black Widow glanced at Su Xing, who was cosplaying Jotaro, and said without turning her head, "If you leave work on time just to research outfits, then you've completely wasted your time." Su Xing's grin instantly vanished. Wasted? This outfit is super cool, okay. What's not good about it? Su Xing, who had been mocked, was about to retort when he heard Nick Fury say to him, "Complete your mission, Su. After you're done, contact me. A new mission is waiting for you." Hearing Nick Fury's words, Su Xing's attention was instantly diverted to this. New mission? As an agent, taking on missions was not uncommon. The question was, what kind of mission? Given Nick Fury's usual habits, he might just throw himself into some hero's birthplace again. Feeling the weight on his shoulders, Su Xing could only smile. Everything at the organization's command. At this moment, in Stark Tower, Pepper Potts was dealing with a barrage of problems, while Happy stood by, protecting Pepper's safety. The current loss of control has nothing to do with Stark Enterprises. The reason this expo went out of control was due to an external invasion. The audience instantly erupted. Excuse me, why did such a major accident occur at this expo? Were there no corresponding inspections? When will Mr. Stark return? Will this incident be categorized as mechanical failure? Excuse me. Facing the frantic questions from the reporters below, Pepper felt a headache coming on. Originally, she didn't want to accept interviews, but the company's market value had started to plummet. Although Stark Enterprises was a large company and wouldn't be affected at its core, it was precisely for this reason that the percentage points lost, when converted into money, were dropping by hundreds of millions. After learning that Tony was safe, Pepper could only brace herself and face the reporters. Happy's phone, which was trying to maintain order, suddenly rang. Looking at the caller, Happy's eyes instantly lit up, and he answered. Just as Pepper was struggling to cope with the reporters' relentless questions and the situation was spiraling out of control, Happy walked directly onto the stage and placed the phone in front of the microphone. Hello. Tony's voice instantly echoed throughout the venue. The matter has been successfully resolved, and I just want to say one thing. Hammer, my good fellow, although this incident was not intentional on your part, for public safety, you should still give up your armor research. For more information, please wait for my press conference tomorrow. As soon as these words were uttered, the reporters below instantly exploded. Listening to Tony's voice, Pepper's mood also relaxed. However, before Pepper could say a few words to Tony, she saw Happy excitedly hang up the phone. Sorry, I have to leave for a moment. Mr. Stark told me to immediately drive and pick someone up. Double pay, on the hillside. Happy, driving a luxury car, sped along, his focus more intense than ever before. Thinking of Tony's promise to him over the phone, Happy's mouth nearly split into a grin. Double salary. He had worked at Stark Enterprises for so many years. When had he ever encountered such a good thing? Since Tony returned from the cave, he had been working nonstop overtime every day, and his salary hadn't increased at all. Although he didn't know why Tony was so urgently calling him over. Firstly, he could confirm that Tony was fine. Secondly, the salary had indeed been directly transferred to his account by the wealthy Tony. Pressing the accelerator, Happy expertly parked the car at the bottom of the hillside after passing a few blocks. Closing the car door, Happy's heart trembled as he looked at the scene before him. The hillside in front of him looked as if it had suffered a localized war. From the depths of the hillside, smoke continued to rise. Happy sniffed, feeling the pungent smell of gunpowder in the air, a shiver running down his spine. How exactly did Tony resolve this crisis? With such intensity, would he really be okay? Seeing the scene before him, Happy no longer cared about the so-called double salary and started running up the hillside, covering his mouth with both hands as he ran, shouting loudly. Sir, where are you? Stop shouting, Happy, I'm here. With a crisp sound, Tony, clad in his Iron Man suit, landed directly behind Happy. Hearing a strange noise behind him, Happy immediately turned to look at Tony. Sir, it's me. Seeing Tony open his helmet, Happy's face lit up with excitement, and he ran over, trying to hug Tony. Sir, it's really great that you're okay. Seeing Happy trying to hug him, Tony's old habit of cleanliness kicked in, and he immediately extended his hand in front of Happy. Wait, I miss you too, Happy. But no hugs, I might still have various explosives on me, so? Seeing Tony's obstruction, Happy stopped in place, his face full of excitement. I understand, sir, it's really great that you're okay. Tony smiled, then got straight to the point. All right, is the car here? Yes, sir, what do you want me to do? What you need to do is take him away, buddy. Rhodes, wearing the War Machine armor, also landed behind Happy. Happy turned around, and, before he could greet Rhodes, saw Su Xing following behind Rhodes. Looking at Su Xing, who seemed strangely but somehow handsomely dressed, Happy's eyes revealed confusion. This is... Tony patted Happy's shoulder. I still have something to discuss with him, so, send him to my home as soon as possible. I'll wait for you there. Su Xing smiled faintly. We meet again, Happy, Looking at Su Xing's wicked yet handsome and chiseled face, a bad premonition welled up in Happy's heart. Just then, S.H.I.E.L.D had also cleaned up the mess and left the scene. The already somewhat orange sky, illuminated by S.H.I.E.L.D's fighter jets, briefly cast a large shadow on the ground, completely covering Happy, who stood rooted to the spot. Looking at the black fighter jets in the sky, like some strange monster, Happy's face was full of bewilderment. Seeing Happy like this, Tony looked at the time and immediately interrupted him. "All right, Happy, in order not to delay Agent Su's off-duty time, I think you need to hurry." Happy, who had recovered from his shock, didn't have time to say anything before Tony put on his helmet and flew away. "Sir, wait." Rhodes, standing by, looked at Happy, who remained rooted to the spot, reaching out into the air, a smile also appearing on his face. "I hope you won't delay the agent's off-duty time, buddy." With that, without waiting for Happy's reaction, he also followed Tony's pace. With such a big incident happening here, he had to go back and report to his superiors in the military. A gentle breeze blew. Only Happy and Su Xing remained standing there. Su Xing summoned the system, checked the time, walked forward, and patted Happy's shoulder. "Not much time left. You need to hurry." Listening to Su Xing's words, Happy stiffly turned around and looked at Su Xing, a sense of resigned sacrifice gradually appearing in his eyes. Forget it. Maybe this was God's best arrangement for him. As time passed, at the entrance of Tony's villa, Su Xing gently pressed the brake, performed a series of maneuvers, and the car executed a beautiful tail drift, stopping elegantly at the entrance of the villa. Opening the car door, Su Xing looked at the pale-faced Happy, feeling a bit helpless. No choice. Who told Tony not to trust him to come alone, and insisted on having Happy keep an eye on him. To save time and completely finish this mission, he had no other option. After closing the car door, Su Xing left Happy with a remark. "Could you please park the car in the garage? Time is short, so I'll go in first." With a bang, Happy, sitting in the passenger seat, almost threw up from the jolt. Happy clutched his chest, constantly warning himself. If he really threw up in this car, forget about his salary. He might not be able to afford the compensation even if he worked for 10 lifetimes. Looking at Su Xing's retreating back, Happy suppressed the nausea in his stomach and moved to the driver's seat. If he had known earlier that Su Xing drove like this, he would never have handed over the driving control of the car to Su Xing in the first place. He wasn't just rushing for speed. He was so desperate he wished the car would grow wings and just fly. Happy patted his chest, adjusting his state. The thrilling journey almost gave him a heart attack. Starting the car, Happy slowly parked it in the garage. Now he only hoped that Tony and Su Xing's discussion would go smoothly. Otherwise, his hard work on the journey would truly be in vain. Meanwhile, in the underground laboratory, Tony, who was repairing his armor, heard Jarvis's voice. "Sir, Su Xing is looking for you at the entrance." Listening to Jarvis, Tony was slightly surprised. Although his armor's energy wasn't very full, had they really arrived so quickly? Putting down the tools in his hand, Tony said, "Tell him to come here and find me." "Yes, sir." Tony picked up a towel nearby and wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling a bit curious about the upcoming meeting. When Su Xing first said he could completely remove the fragments from his body, he didn't believe it. But according to Jarvis's analysis just now, combined with the battlefield footage at the time, there was indeed no other reason to explain the various things that happened then. Thinking of this, Tony licked his lips and murmured to himself, "Superpowers. How much have you been hiding?" As the elevator descended, Su Xing looked around with curious eyes. Observing the smooth, clean walls, he couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. He truly was a super genius, worthy of Thanos' words, "We are all cursed with knowledge." In just these few steps, the technology displayed was even more advanced than that used at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Recalling the satellite monitoring system Tony later built for S.H.I.E.L.D, Su Xing felt even more emotional. Knowledge, that thing, is truly incredibly useful. Arriving at the laboratory door, Tony, who had been waiting, said to him, "Come in." Looking at Tony in his white tank top, Su Xing couldn't help but inwardly complain again. Rich people, huh? Even this brand of white tank top looked different from the one he was wearing. Seeing Su Xing enter, Tony stopped wasting words. "Unless you're carrying any listening devices, this place is absolutely safe. Anything you want to say, you can make clear here." Hearing Tony's words, Su Xing relaxed and leaned back in a nearby chair. "That depends on what you want to ask, Tony. Anything I can tell you, I will." Tony crossed his arms and stared into Su Xing's eyes, saying, "First question, what exactly is your superpower? Is it related to mutants or some supernatural ability?" Su Xing stood up from the chair and said to Tony, "As you can see, Tony, my superpower, well, it's actually more like, how should I put it?" Su Xing pursed his lips, as if organizing his words. After a brief hesitation, Su Xing met Tony's gaze and smiled. "Actually, this ability, it can be put this way. As early as these few hundred years of human evolution, some people have comprehended higher-level abilities. Tony, do you believe in Darwin's theory of evolution?" Hearing Su Xing's words, Tony looked puzzled. Among scientists, who doesn't support Darwin's theory of evolution? He wasn't like Ivan, who believed in some unknown entity and seemed to have gone mad. "Of course I do. Are you trying to say your ability evolved?" Su Xing's mouth twitched, not directly answering Tony's question. Life has thrived and evolved for hundreds of millions of years, finally reaching the pinnacle of humanity. And among these humans, some have comprehended an even higher level of power, elevating themselves to a place unattainable by ordinary mortals. These people are the so-called strong ones. Each of them is extraordinary, each possessing unusual power. The eyes of an eagle, the hearing of a bat, and the vibrational perception of a spider can all be found in these people, and these are just the lowest level abilities. Listening to Su Xing's answer, Tony's confusion finally turned into utter bewilderment. Wait a minute. Let me digest this. Are you saying all of this to declare yourself a mutant?" Su Xing chuckled. "Mutants? Of course not. Strictly speaking, they are just a group of genetically mutated humans. And the evolution I'm talking about isn't that simple." Hearing Su Xing's words, Tony immediately became respectful. "Please continue." Su Xing cleared his throat and continued. "As I said, each of these people is extraordinary, each possessing unusual power. The eyes of an eagle, the hearing of a bat, and the vibrational perception of a spider can all be found in these people, and these are just the lowest level abilities. And higher level people." Tony's pupils contracted. Even these basic abilities could be considered abnormal. So what changes would occur in higher level people? Looking at Tony's expectant gaze, Su Xing forcibly suppressed his laughter and said earnestly, "More powerful individuals can even generate formidable electrical kinetic force from their own potential, like electric eels. And such a person can truly be called one in a million." "What?" Tony's wide eyes were filled with confusion about the world. "Electrical propulsion? What is that?" Looking at Tony's bewildered expression, Su Xing truly wanted to laugh. He didn't want to expose Platinum Star to Tony. But the purpose of this matter was only to gain Tony's trust, not to tell Tony all his secrets. He would absolutely not tell Tony the full truth about this ability. Besides, even if he told Tony everything without reservation, Tony probably wouldn't believe him. After all, the origin of Stans and JoJo was even more absurd. Even if he told Tony, he might not believe it. So, in that case, it was better to just make up a random excuse for Tony. And what he had just said without hesitation was none other than the concept of the magnetic field overlord. After a brief thought, Tony asked Su Xing with confusion, Are you trying to say that some people have evolved the ability to control electricity? Su Xing, suppressing his laughter, said to Tony, "Yes, strictly speaking, this skill is not simply about controlling electricity. One can use their will to rapidly rub the body's cells, generating electrical power. This level of power is measured in volts and is called electrical propulsion." At this point, Su Xing paused and looked at Tony. "Do you understand?" The dazed Tony wanted to nod, but he couldn't connect what had happened earlier with an electromagnetic field. Seeing Tony's bewildered expression, Su Xing considerately said, "If you didn't understand, I can explain it to you again. Even higher, there's magnetic field rotation, where cells rub at an even higher speed, generating a powerful magnetic field, which, in addition to immense power, can also influence the greater universe. Magnetic field rotation is not something incomprehensible, but a superpower. A superpower that can be cultivated." At this point, the confusion on Tony's face increased rather than decreased. Su Xing shrugged and continued, "If you don't understand, I can explain it again. Actually, enough, enough, enough. I've heard enough." Seeing that Su Xing was about to launch into another long discourse, Tony immediately raised his hand to stop him. Rubbing his temples, Tony was genuinely starting to question reality. What was all this? A cultivable superpower? And he was cultivating it. Su Xing, who had been stopped, looked completely innocent. "Then what do you want to ask, Tony?" Tony closed his eyes. He shouldn't have asked Su Xing that question. Hearing those words from Su Xing had truly given him quite a shock. After a few seconds of thought, he chose to abandon thinking between believing and not believing. "You know what? I don't care anymore. Now I just want to know one question." Tony stared into Su Xing's eyes and said, "How exactly can you remove the shrapnel from my chest?" Su Xing smiled. "That's simple, Tony. Friendly reminder. Your heart has been working all day. It's time to let it rest."
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.